Hey there. Welcome to BlackBerry Unraveled. This podcast is the way we in which we peel back to one of the most fascinating tech stories in the industry. I'm Karan, and I'm joined by my teammates, Ishan, Saman, Aditya, Harsh, and we all are here from the IT channel. So let me begin by saying that we are also thrilled to have a tech expert here with us. His name is Chuck Howard, and he's a veteran journalist, and he closely followed the rise and fall of BlackBerry from the front lines. He is a former reporter, editor, and a business tech specialist from the Waterloo Regional Record. He's been chronicling around the region's transformation since 2005, and he's also the author of a very famous book, BlackBerry Town, which has helped us to get some deeper knowledge regarding the prospects and the incidents which happened at BlackBerry during the time. So let's get ready, and this is BlackBerry Unraveled for you. So let's begin. Sure.
Okay.
Firstly, Chuck, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute honor to have you here today. And if you wish to introduce yourself for us, you to be here.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. Yeah. Okay.
Karan.
Thanks very much for having me. Yeah, looking forward to our chat and thanks for reaching out. I'm happy to share my thoughts on what happened at BlackBerry and how I covered the company.
Sure, it's nice. Firstly, many of us have read the book, but if we are not familiar, let me just ask, like, what motivated you to write the book BlackBerry Town, and what did you hope that readers would take away from after reading your book? Could you just elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah, well, I basically was assigned to cover BlackBerry. The company was known as Research in Motion in 2005. I had been working at the local paper here in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, for a number of years, and I had been working as an editor. And in 2005, I was looking to get back to the reporting staff where I started my career. And I was told the only opening is on the business team. And I'd never covered business before, but they said that's your only choice. If you want to go back to reporting, you're going to cover business. And at first, I was reluctant because I had been a local news reporter, like city hall, police, school board, things like that. But then I thought, well, I'll give it a try, and they sort of said you can learn as you go. So I went on to the business team and then started to have a look around and what was going on. And I was aware of the BlackBerry story because they're right in our community. And but I hadn't paid close attention to the company. So once I started to really follow the company, I really became fascinated with what was going on. I was really kind of literally blown away by what they had accomplished. I'd never really thought about them much before, and because I couldn't afford to buy a BlackBerry at that point, and the company didn't give them to us. Some of the managers had them, but not reporters. So once I started following the company, it kind of opened up a whole new world for me. I was quite fascinated by how much they had accomplished. And in 2005, they were the number one smartphone maker on the planet. Um, and we're doing really well. They were like the toast of the town. Everybody was Mike Lazaridis, the co-founder, had been made chancellor of the university. They were on the cover of magazines in the U.S. and Canada and elsewhere, and like they were really big local celebrities. And so this became quite exciting all of a sudden for me. And I wasn't actually the lead reporter. There was another guy who came on board around the same time. He was from the U.S., Ohio. He had come up. That's a bit of another story, but he joined the paper and he was quite good on tech. So they put him on the BlackBerry beat, and I was sort of the backup. So for the next few years, I was sort of backup reporter. And then he left the paper, and I became the lead BlackBerry reporter. So I would have covered the company for the local paper from 2005 to 13 when I retired to start working on the book. So basically, I followed the company. I started when they were at their peak, and then there was really they were number one and doing really well until about 2008. And then the iPhone came along. Its iPhone debuted in 2007, as you probably recall. And it took about a year before they really started to gain traction. And so then in around 2008, it became apparent that RIM was going to have some pretty tough competition. And then sort of Google got into the game around that time as well because they wanted to get their search engine on phones. So then between the two of them, Apple had the iPhone, of course, and then Google brought out, they did the software for they didn't do any manufacturing, but the Asian companies, even Motorola had a Android phone called the Droid, and they gradually wore down BlackBerry. It was kind of like I compare it to a 1-2 punch. The first punch was the iPhone, and then the second one was the Google phones, the Asian phones. And so they gradually eroded and took away market share until BlackBerry, by 2013, became apparent they're not going to make a comeback. So around that time, I left the record, and I kind of thought this was I'd always sort of wanted to write a book. I think every journalist, when they get into the business, always thinks, oh, I'd love to write a book at some point. So, and I was covering, this was such a big story, both locally, nationally, and internationally. And I was following it as part of my job. I thought, this is a great book opportunity. If I'm ever going to write a book, now's the time. So in 2013, I retired from the record, kind of took early retirement, started working on the book, and never having written a book before, it took me longer than I thought it would, because it ended up taking about 5.5 years, because the book came out in 2019. So longer than I anticipated. I learned some things from writing the book that I could do, I could have done it more quickly, by being more strategic in who I interviewed and things like that. If I ever wrote another book, I'd do it more quickly. But anyway, the problem was I didn't have a deadline, because I kind of wrote the whole thing and then shopped it around to some publishers. And I did get a publisher from Toronto, Lorimer, and they took it on. They wanted a whole bunch of changes, which took more time. And then the book finally came out in 2019. I should mention that there was another book that came out in 2015, written by two reporters from the Toronto Globe and Mail, called Losing the Signal. And that sort of set me back a bit, because their book came out and I thought I almost abandoned my book. But so I read their book and I thought, what am I going to do? And so then I decided, well, I've done too much already. I've got to keep going. So I sort of changed my book and took a different angle. And Lorimer, the publisher, worked with me and we said, we'll make it different from Losing the Signal. So it came out in 2019. So basically, that's the background story of how the book came together. It was really it was an opportunity where I'd covered the company. And then I thought, I'm the best person. We wanted to have a local person write the book. We felt it was our story too, not just the Toronto people. We thought, no, somebody local should do it. And I was in the best position to do it. So basically, that's how it all came together.
Right. That's nice to know. And basically, since you're the local over there in Kitchener Waterloo, so could you just explain that since the rise of BlackBerry in the locality, did you notice any significant changes in infrastructure or in any other perspective, so to say, with the rise of RIM
The
and
the
in the
impact
region
on the community, yeah, oh
overall?
yeah, they went from really nobodies to being really, huge celebrities in town, like Mike Lazaridis, who is the brains behind the phone. He was a student at University of Waterloo. He came to in the early 1980s and enrolled at Waterloo. He was originally from Windsor, Ontario, down near Detroit, but he came to Waterloo because the University of Waterloo had a great reputation in computer science built up over the years, so that attracted him to Waterloo. And then he left before graduating and started Research in Motion in 84. So they were just a small company. They had a little office over a bagel shop in Waterloo, and they had to make their own office furniture and stuff like that. So they started off super small. Nobody knew who they were. And so it basically took them 12 years before the first smartphone came out. So they did a bunch of other stuff and nobody knew who they were. And they were actually bugging the newspaper to get coverage of what they were doing. And so they would come to us and ask, try to get stuff in the paper. And I wasn't covering them then, but we didn't, we did a few little things about them. But so it sort of went from them begging us for coverage to when they became huge, we were begging them and they wouldn't give us any coverage because they were going for the big media like the New York Times, the Globe and Mail, and the big American media and Canadian and even British or whoever. But so that was kind of a big change that took a number of years to unfold. But they gradually expanded their workforce to, they started off up in north part of Waterloo, near the University of Waterloo, because they wanted to hire a lot of grads from the University of Waterloo, computer science. So their first big office was near the campus, and then they kept adding more buildings to the point where they almost took over a whole street of buildings. It was all Research in Motion buildings, and so that was, and then they eventually grew to become the largest private employer in the whole community. They acquired other buildings throughout the city, the Twin Cities, we call it. And so, yeah, and then they built, this is in my book too, each of the two co-CEOs, Mike Lesries and Jim Balzilli, started their own think tanks. One's called Perimeter Institute for Physics, and the other one's on international governance. They're in downtown Waterloo. So they contributed to the community that way. And, things like that. Mike Lazaridis has given a lot of money to both universities. So is Jim Balzilli. He gave some money to start a cancer wing at a local hospital. They did quite a bit through philanthropic stuff, but so they went from nobodies to being, and buildings are named after them here, and over the course of their time here.
So like they were like nobodies, and then they become just gazillionaires. They started developing the community, and like
Yeah.
did you anybody like angel financing or like government support which helped RIM grow to a certain extent, or was it just their own with their own?
Um, they got some government support, but I'm trying to think. Not a lot. A lot of it was generated through their own, company products and sales. If you look at the history of BlackBerry, they were doing anything and everything. I called it engineers for hire in the early days. Like they did electronic signs for General Motors, plant in Oshawa near Toronto. They did a barcode reader for the National Film Board in Canada to read film more quickly, to find stuff. And they did programmable logic controllers for Sutherland Schultz. That's assembly line software, which they were in Cambridge, which is not far from here, Cambridge, Ontario. And that's how Jim Balzilli joined the company. When he was in high school, his shop teacher told him the person who can link computers wirelessly would end up making a lot of money. And that sort of planted the seed. So he was always big on wireless ham radios, things like that. So he was always looking for opportunities in the wireless field. And really, how he got into phones was through Ted Rogers, who's a big name in Canada in cable TV at that time. So Ted Rogers was over in Sweden, and he stumbled across this thing called Mobitex, mobile text, which was being used in taxi cabs by Ericsson. This is late 1980s. So he bought the Canadian rights to it. So it's data that they could send wirelessly to taxis, to summon taxis. Do you guys know all this stuff, or is yeah? I can go over it.
Yeah,
Should I keep talking?
easily.
Yeah,
Yeah, share with this, and it's just that learning about things from you, like getting the inside info about these things, is completely new, and
yeah.
we're completely like we're excited to know more. So we're letting you speak, and all. We
Okay,
have questions lined up for you. So it's lovely.
okay. Well, I'll carry on. Anyway, Mobitex, Rogers was looking for a company. He didn't really know much about Mobitex, so he was looking around for a company that did. And somebody said, "Oh, there's a company in Waterloo called Research in Motion. They seem to know a lot about wireless." So he got in touch with RIM and Mike Lazaridis and said, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And so they jumped on board, and so RIM started working with Mobitex, making it work better. They did stuff like they made it faster. They did data compression. They built development tools to make it, work better. And then they found that the modems they were actually using Ericsson modems from Sweden, Rogers, and so they thought, well, they weren't working that well. So they decided we're going to build our own modems. RIM decided. So they started building their own modems, to connect the wireless signal to receive it. And their first one was called the Brick, which they used in point of sale terminals, vending machines, things like that. And then they built a smaller brick that you could slip into a laptop. It was like a card, which you could download stuff wirelessly. But it didn't work that well because the antenna was interfering with the signal on the laptop antenna, and it would overheat and things like that. So then they decided, let's scrap the laptop. Let's just take the modem and we'll put a keyboard on it, a card, flip up screen. And that was the first smartphone. It was called the Pager 900. So they built that at RIM, and
So
they,
would you
yeah,
say that's just the start of the BlackBerry? Like that
yes.
before it was just RIM, but after that it became BlackBerry. Yeah,
The company name didn't change until 2012, actually.
yeah.
And this is still mid 90s, early 90s. Yeah, it was called Research in Motion all the way up to 2012 or 13. So, anyway, I'll speed through a bit more quickly. But so the Pager 900 was the first, and they got a deal with Bell South in the States because Bell South had the rights to Mobitex in the US, but they had no devices to put on it. Like they were more into voice. So they decided to try selling the Pager 900, but it was kind of too bulky. It was a flip up screen, a bulky keyboard. It wasn't very mobile. So they didn't sell that well. It impressed the critics. They thought this is a great new device, but it didn't sell because it was too bulky. So then they were, they sort of thought, well, what do we do now? But they noticed a curious thing about the Pager 900 because they gave it to some of their staff, RIM, and they would take them home at night and use them at home. And so when the RIM manager said, "Do you want to give these things back?" They said, "No, we like these. They're bulky, but we still like them." So they knew they were on to something at that point. So then Mike Lazaridis came up with the Pager 950. He scrapped the flip up screen. He took the modem, he put the keyboard right on top of it and a smaller screen, and it looked like a bar of soap. So that was the Pager 950. So then they went back to Bell South with a smaller device, like about the size of a bar of soap, and they pitched it to Bell South. And Bell South thought this is a good idea. There was some glitches along the way, but which we don't need to get into. Like they left the prototype in a taxi. They had to go to Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah,
I don't know if
yes,
you know this story.
yeah, picking up from I guess we've seen the movie BlackBerry,
Yeah,
right?
it's in the movie. That's
Which is,
accurate.
yeah, I agree with you. That's one of the things. I mean, there are
That
some
actually
other
happened.
obsession of laxity with Onyx developers only and not outsourcing the things from different countries. Is that a thing, or was that just added to exaggerate the fact of?
You mean the movie? Like, sorry, I couldn't quite
No, yeah.
understand you
The
there, but
movie, in the movie, there was a scene, right? He's obsessed with the manufacturers at Onyx to uh, make the components for the BlackBerry phone and even for the modems.
yeah, they were pretty fussy about, how it would work, and that was functionality was really important to them, security, battery life, and things like that. But anyway, the Pager 950 Bell South, that gave them their first big deal. Sorry, I'm getting to your question about the financing. So Bell South gave them a $70 million US deal where they'd buy 70 million worth of 950s and sell them on their network. So that's where they really started to take off. And around that time, they renamed the 950 the BlackBerry, the first BlackBerry. So that was really the jumping off point to their, you know, the huge sales and their, fame mushroomed at this point. So, yeah. And then on the heels of that, they were able to they went public. They started trading shares on the New York Stock Exchange. So they did an IPO, initial public offering, and they raised a bunch of money on the New York Stock Exchange, the Nasdaq, I think, and the Toronto Stock Exchange. So they raised over 100 million. So that was really helped finance the expansion as well. So they did the roadshow and everything, and so that was the jumping off point to around 99. So for the next decade, they really did really well and put the local community on the map and became a huge success. So that they did it mostly privately. The government didn't really give them a lot. They did in the early days to keep the doors open, but not when they became big. Yeah, they didn't need the government funding. Sorry, I think your
So
mic's off there.
yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk about when it was at peak. Let's talk about between relationships between the co-founders and actually the founders. Like we saw that Doug Segnin is a big name when it comes to RIM.
Doug Freegan.
Yeah, can you talk
Actually,
something their relation?
so Doug Freegan was a co-founder, but he wasn't co-CEO. That was Jim Balzilli. It was Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balzilli. And Doug, he had a prominent role in the movie, but the movie, if you've seen it, is a bit of if they call it a satire, they change some of the details to make it funny. Like, it's basically accurate, but Doug was more in the background. He didn't like the media. We tried for years to get an interview with him, but he wouldn't talk to us. So he was more in the background. The company was run basically by Mike and Jim, we called them. And Mike was the tech guy. He was in charge of making sure the phones worked and the networks worked. And Jim was more in sales, marketing, and branding, things like that. And like when they did the quarterly results, quarterly conference calls, he was always on the call with analysts. Like I used to listen to them every quarter and report on their quarterly results. So it would always be Jim Balzilli. So he was more the public face of the company, I'd say. Although Mike Lazaridis was well known as well. And he, got a lot of attention, a lot of stuff in the media about him. So it was basically those two guys. Now, just further to your question, they were sort of different. They weren't friends behind the scenes. There was a lot written about this co-CEO structure was unusual and how can you make that work? And it did work for a long time, but in the end, it kind of came to unravel because Jim Balzilli became unhappy with what was happening at the company and how they were losing sales to the iPhone. So he was complaining more behind the scenes. There were more disagreements and so on. And he was also around that time, 2007, trying to get an NHL hockey team. If you know, hockey is big here in Canada and the US, ice hockey.
Yeah,
So he was trying to get a team in the National Hockey League in Pittsburgh. And Mike Lazaridis, although he never admitted publicly, I think felt it was a distraction. Jim, was pursuing these outside interests and not keeping his eye on the business. He will deny that to this day. But so there were outside attractions that didn't make Mike Lazaridis happy, distractions and things like that. So their relationship began to become more tense, and they weren't getting along, and yeah, it didn't go well in the end. They don't. I don't think they talk to each other now. But so it was great while they're doing well, but not so well now. But sorry, your mics are off there.
I'm sorry, just a second. Yeah, I was just saying
Yeah.
that the relationship between these Verizon people, I guess you've seen the movie, right? So we know about Verizon being a provider, like service provider, right? So what was the relation between
Yes.
them and Verizon and the CEO of Lazarus? I mean, CEO of BlackBerry, what is to say?
Right.
Walsley and Lazarus,
Lazaridis.
Verizon and this company, Verizon. Could you elaborate on that?
How you mean compared to the movie, or yeah,
No,
just
when
in general?
just in general about the relation between Verizon and BlackBerry, because in the movie we've seen that how in the end they had a falling apart between after the launch of iPhone, especially we can see that they're
Yeah.
losing right.
Yeah.
Could you tell about
Well,
that?
I would. Yeah, their relationship, as I said, was at first they complemented each other well because Lazarus was the tech guy and
Harsh,
Ozili was the
I'm sorry.
sales fellow. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, could you just repeat what you said? I'm sorry.
Yeah, they complemented each other because Lazaridis was the tech guy, and Jim Bolzoli was the sales and marketing guy, and business development. So, and Jim Bolzoli was brought in initially because they wanted an expert who could do that. To break into the big markets, and Jim had he's from Ontario. He'd gone to the University of Toronto. Then he went to the Harvard Business School in Boston. So he knew how to. His background was accounting and business development, so he knew how to break into the bigger markets. And initially, he deserves a lot of the credit for BlackBerry doing well because he used these strategic guerrilla sales tactics. Like when the BlackBerry first came out, he kind of targeted sort of the Wall Street stockbrokers, large New York law firms, and places like that. First, he went to them, and he hired young sales staff, not older people. He wanted young, dynamic, aggressive,
Yeah,
energetic
I
salespeople.
because in the
Yeah.
movie also we've seen that Walsley was like, you are not just salesman now, you're male models, and you're supposed to be selling this as an experience of some
Yes. Yeah.
sort.
Yeah.
To some time, right?
And they did well that way. And another strategy they used was they bypassed the IT managers and went right to the CEOs with the BlackBerry because they felt that the IT people would block them because it was too complicated to integrate into their networks. So they went right to the top, and so once they got the CEOs, showed it to them. They got meetings with CEOs and said, "Here's how it works," and I'll send you an email and to your computer and right from my phone sitting here, and it would work. And then the CEO would go, "Whoa, oh, look at that!" And so then the CEO would say, "I got to have one of these." So then they'd tell the IT people in their company, we're going to have bring in these Blackberries," and the IT people say, "What? What?" But then they'd have no choice but to do it. So it was a good strategy and it worked. And so, and then they basically fanned out across the US and Canada and targeted large law firms, Fortune 500 companies, the US military. So they went for the high profile corporate and military government, got them, showed them the BlackBerry. And that's so their initial target was business, corporate, high profile business. And that's where they first got it, got a lot of traction. And so that was their strategy. It was strategic. And Jim Balzilli was basically responsible for that. So, yeah. And it became so popular, you probably heard this, that the BlackBerry was nicknamed the Crackberry because it was like crack cocaine. It was addictive. So it was called the Crackberry.
I with you on that one. First thing
Yes.
on BlackBerry, first thing that comes up after just researching about BlackBerry is this BlackBerry. That thing just
Yeah.
pops up
Yeah.
out of. That
So,
I agree with you.
yeah, they really were good at capturing the cultural zeitgeist, the imagination of the public in a way, the business public anyway. It really became a hot new device, and it was exciting to be able to cover it because it was new and different. And that was because I might be answering one of your future questions, but it was an exciting time for the smartphone industry, the first decade of the 2000s. Whereas now I feel it's kind of a static industry. It's not changing that much. The smartphones become sort of a commodity now. It's more the apps in the phone, but the phone itself there's been no big leap forward since the iPhone. It's basically everybody takes it for granted, whereas back then it was exciting and new, and but now it's just people expect it to work, and so it's not as exciting now, I feel, as it was then, the industry.
Yeah. So if just to ask you one question about this thing, what would you say about are the key weaknesses or key strengths, so to say, from the leadership of RIN since you started covering uh, and you have observed everything from such those things, right? Can you just elaborate on that broadly?
On the leadership of the company.
Yeah, strength and
Yeah.
the weaknesses of from everybody if you
Yeah,
have some.
I would say in the early days, and this is in my book, but people talked about how agile and nimble the company was. They didn't have a very bureaucratic structure, so they were small and they were able to change quickly and adapt to changing market trends. Whereas once they got bigger, it became more bureaucratic and more layers of managers. Once RIM got to be successful, they started bringing in experts from other companies like Motorola in the U.S. So they brought a different culture, and some of the early employees I talked to complained about this. They weren't as happy. They ended up leaving the company, and RIM just became more, and they felt there was more sort of deadwood and more bureaucratic waste in the company. So it became more top heavy and so not as nimble and so on. So that was kind of a weakness once. And I think every large corporation faces this challenge when they become big and successful. They have too many layers of management and they can't sort of change direction if they need to be. And the CEOs become more sort of sheltered or in kind of they're not getting the right advice because they've got too many people who uh, you know I wouldn't call them sycophants, but people who won't tell them what they need to know. But so the leadership, yeah, I think suffered from that. um, yeah.
So, was there anything the public misunderstood about the BlackBerry during its decline?
um, well, when I describe the decline and fall of BlackBerry, I kind of point to a number of things. It wasn't any one thing. It was a combination of things. And my list would basically include founder's syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of that term, where the founder gets too locked into one way of doing things and won't listen to new innovation. They're too married to what they made the company successful. So Mike Lazaridis was too much in love with the physical keyboard as opposed to the touch screen. He eventually went to the touch screen, but it was a bit too late, and he felt he didn't even want a camera on the phones initially because he felt they'd be used by people to take photographs of equipment and other competitors' factories, sneak photos. But so he didn't want cameras. So he kind of was a bit resistant to change, like the touch screen and things like that. And another factor in the decline, I'd say, was they became overconfident. You could call it. They became complacent. Another term that's used is hubris. They thought they were really good and they knew everything. So they weren't listening to criticism or people saying, "Oh, you should try something different." There was distractions like Jim Balzilli trying to get his hockey team. They both started think tanks, which were good for the community, but they took their attention away from the company. And Mike Lazaridis was eventually appointed chancellor of University of Waterloo. So there was other stuff going on outside the company that maybe was a distraction. Their technology there was a
Yeah.
problem with they were using an old operating system for the BlackBerry from the start, and they kept sort of adding to it, but they were still using the same old operating system that they had from the beginning, and it couldn't handle the richer apps and stuff that was on the iPhone. So they needed to bring in a new operating system. So they were kind of weak on software compared to Apple. So that by the time they brought in a new operating system, it was too late. They bought this company from Ottawa called QNX and based their next generation of phones on QNX software. But the new generation of phones didn't come out till 2013, and by then
Yeah, sorry.
they were too far
Were there
behind.
did you like discover any surprising discoveries when you were researching about your book about the
Anything
BlackBerry?
really surprising?
Yeah, anything.
Um, I would say I already knew a lot of stuff to begin with, having covered the company. It was just finding the right people to interview who would give me the most important information. This stuff about their operating system, I basically got because I was able to get an interview with the guy who started QNX software, and his name was, I think, Dan Dodge. It's going back a ways. I met him at a conference in California, a RIM conference back in 2012, maybe, San Jose. And so I asked him for an interview, and so we sat down, and he basically critiqued RIM's operating system and said, like, it was built for small devices, not big, fancy iPhone-like devices. He compared it to a pile of spaghetti you're trying to make sense out of. Like, they kept on adding stuff to it, fixes and updates, and nobody could understand what the hell was going on here if something went wrong. So he said they needed their operating system was too outdated. They needed a new system like QNX had, which was more modular, like Lego. You could take pieces out and put other ones in without affecting the whole thing. So that was a real eye opener for me. Dan Dodge, that interview. And as far as other real surprises, I can't think of any off the top of my head about what went
Oh,
wrong. Yeah.
so like, what do you think would have happened if it would have kept up with the trends? Like, since it didn't keep up with the trends, it went under. Do you think it would have
Yeah.
still continued?
Well, I would say like BlackBerry's still going now. It's still one of the biggest companies in Waterloo, if you can believe that. They're a software company. They do security software, cybersecurity, and Internet of Things, connecting different devices, machines, and also automobile software from QNX. They've still got about 3,000 employees. But when RIM was at its peak, they had 20,000. So they've come down quite a bit. But so it's a different company now, much smaller, but still active and still publicly traded. But if they had a window of opportunity where they could have stayed in the race and been a force in the smartphone business today, and that would have been from about 2008 to 10, where they needed to come out with a good touchscreen device, and they weren't able to pull it off. Like you probably know the story of the BlackBerry Storm. It was their first touchscreen device, and it didn't sell well
Yes.
because it had a lot of glitches and problems. Like they tried to make a click-through touchscreen, like you touch the screen, but it feels like a physical keyboard. So they wanted the best of both worlds. See, this was another factor in their downfall. I thought they couldn't just copy the iPhone; they had to make it better than the iPhone. So they come out with this click-through touch screen, but it didn't work very well. It was bug-prone and didn't work, so it didn't sell well. So then they couldn't come out with a good touch screen fast enough when they needed one. And so that was their opportunity to stay in and be a factor in the smartphone market. But once that window closed around 2010, it was too late. The market was locked up by the iPhone. Samsung, I think, was in there. There were just other devices using touchscreen, Android, that locked up the market. So when RIM brought in its QNX phones in 2013, there was no space left for them to get in there. So once that opportunity was gone, it was kind of a slow slide out of the smartphone market. They brought in a bunch of other phones like the Passport, the BlackBerry Passport, which was shaped like a passport. It was kind of a rectangle with corners on it, and it was interesting. They tried hard, but nothing could gain traction. It was too late. So they gradually withdrew from the smartphone business. And now they're just a software company.
Yeah, as you said, right now they are just a software company, but still the biggest in Waterloo. So
One of the, not the biggest, but one of the biggest. Like Open Text is the biggest, if you've ever heard of them. They do business software at Waterloo. They're an offshoot of the University of Waterloo. Open Text it's called.
okay, so how is it going for them right now? Since our Mike Lazard is and they're still connected to BlackBerry.
No. Both Mike and Jim left BlackBerry in 2012 or 2013. So Mike Lazaridis lives west of Waterloo in a quite a large estate surrounded by fences, and we call them berms, ridges of hills. You can't see it unless you fly over it. Yeah, he lives in the area, but you don't see him much. But he has a venture capital firm, right? Quantum Valley Investments. He's always been big into quantum computing. That to him is one of the next big things. If you're familiar with that, it's a faster type of computer, and he's putting money into startups that are involved in quantum computing. And Doug Freegan is involved as well, his old partner, co-founder. So they have this Quantum Valley Investments. It's run out of an office in Waterloo, but he keeps a pretty low profile. You don't see him quoted in the media at all, and he never commented on the movie that came out 2 years ago. He's never said a public word about it. Now Jim Balzilli lives over near Guelph, which is about half an hour away. He's out in the country as well, country estate. So this is typical wealthy people. they build a big house in the country to get away from people so they don't have intruders. And he's more involved in consulting and government lobbying. Like he has the Council of Canadian Innovators, I think it's called. It's a lobby group that lobbies government on tech issues. And he's been in the media lately talking a lot about tariffs, the Trump tariffs in the Canadian media, about what to do in the face of these new tariffs that Donald Trump has brought in. So he's still in the media a fair bit, fairly active.
Yeah, according to like what lessons can current tech startups learn from this BlackBerry rise and fall? Like what they can implement in their startups, according to
What did they learn, or what did we learn?
Yeah, like what can we learn since as we are computer science students. I don't think we have mentioned that to you yet. We are computer science students here in university. So yeah, like we also are interested in our startups, and we were quite amazed by Mike Lazardy's rise, and then its fall is quite historic actually in terms of history. So like, what can we learn? Like, what's there to learn? How to not be like them? Not fall like them.
Yeah. That's a good question. I would say, don't be complacent. You never can sort of coast and rest on your laurels. Like you can't always take it for granted that your device or product will be a hot seller. There's always competition that comes in. Like Mike Lazarus used to say for years when RIM was riding high, he would say we're not being complacent. There will always be competition, so we're always wary of the competition. But my feeling is there's different degrees of competition. Sometimes there's weak competition, and sometimes there's strong competition. So when RIM in the early 2000s was number one, Microsoft kept talking. There was always stuff in the media. Oh, Microsoft's going to move in and push you folks aside. It's just a matter of time. And even the Canadian media were saying that. But Microsoft was dropped the ball a lot on smartphones. They couldn't seem to get it together. And there were other sort of competitors. So, sometimes there's weak competition, but you can't be complacent because there's strong competition as well. And once Apple got in the game and Google, they were much stronger. And although they didn't do it seamlessly as well, if you read stuff about Apple and Steve Jobs, the iPhone almost killed the company. They poured so many resources into it, it nearly sunk the whole company. It took 3 years. It was a huge gamble on their part, and it ended up paying off, but it was a risky bet. So there's no guarantees. And the other quote I used to focus on with Mike Lazaridis is, when RIM was number one, he was asked, well, why has RIM been so successful against these other computer companies? And he said, his quote was, "This is all we do. We just do phones. We don't do computers. We don't do, desktop. We don't make laptops. We just make phones, and we do it well." But it ended up not being a strength. It ended up being a weakness because the other companies were more versatile. Like Apple could take its software from a computer as operating system and put it into a phone. RIM didn't have that. They didn't make computers. So Apple was more versatile. So they could draw from their strengths and put them into the phone. Same with Google, more versatile. RIM lacked that versatility. They weren't a strong software company in the days when the phone race really heated up. So I don't know. There's a couple of lessons for you, but don't be complacent and sometimes be versatile. And I guess the other thing I would mention, and somebody at RIM told me this during our interviews, he said, you have to be willing to put yourself out of business. Like it's called creative destructionism. It's an old theory where you have to make a product that potentially replaces one of your other products, but will outsell it. In other words, come up with a better product that'll kill sales of your existing product. You have to keep innovating, if you know what I mean. Creative destructionism. I think it was Joseph Schumpeter, and there's a Clayton Christensen's another one about, I forget his books, but you have to have a skunk works crew inside the company constantly coming up with new and innovative products that might eventually push your existing products aside. I don't know. There's all kinds of theories, but
So like what? Uh, what do you think was the single biggest turning point in BlackBerry's journey? Like it was in a better way or worse?
sorry, the biggest turning point
Yeah.
in BlackBerry's history. Well, I would say
Like BlackBerry's journey.
there were several. The first turning point, of course, was getting the Mobitex thing, well, creating the first BlackBerry and getting the big deal with Bell South. That was critical to the success of the company. So being in the right place at the right time with the right product and being aggressive, moving in quickly with the right product at the right time. But then that was their downfall in 2008, having the wrong product when they needed it, not being able to be agile enough to switch, change gears, and bring in a good touchscreen. And I feel that's where they kind of messed up because they wanted something better than the iPhone, but they should have just tried to come out with a good touchscreen. Okay, let's match with the iPhone, get it in there. BlackBerry's still a big name. People still want to buy it. Everybody's waiting. Okay, what's BlackBerry going to do to match the iPhone? They bring in the Storm, which doesn't work. They should have just brought in a good, fluid, well-made touchscreen. Let's get it on the market, and people will stick with us. So that was a turning point there. Failure to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if someone were to make a full series or documentary on BlackBerry, what do you think it absolutely must include to like make it more interesting or something that was not in the movie?
Oh, in the BlackBerry movie. Well, a lot of BlackBerry employees did not like the movie. Former BlackBerry employees. There was quite an explosion of stuff
Yeah,
on the internet, LinkedIn, if you look, and other social media of former employees being critical of the movie because they changed a lot of the details to make the story more interesting. They got the broad stuff right, but the characters were changed, and like Doug Freegan was given a much bigger role, but than he had in real life, I feel. But as far as a documentary now, apparently there's one in the works. I've been told by an American company where it's going to be a documentary, not a dramatic film. So I would just say covering a lot of the stuff I've told you, but from people inside the company who actually worked there. Because I didn't work there. I only interviewed people who did and followed their stories. But yeah, I'd say a documentary would cover the key points. But there's several books. There's my book, Losing the Signal. There's basically 4 or 5 books on BlackBerry. There's 3 on the rise of BlackBerry and 2 on the fall. But so there's been a number of books to draw from as well, and that's, I think, is a reflection of how interesting the story was. And so
okay. Right. So anything you would like to add, like any for the new startups or like students or something?
yeah, I could say that there was a lot of talk once BlackBerry fell out of the smartphone race and laid off a whole bunch of people, thousands, and not everybody worked here. They had an overseas contingent as well, but that the Waterloo tech sector would collapse and be in rough shape, but they weathered the storm quite well. We had enough other companies to pick up the slack, none with the same high profile as RIM, but so we've got a number of the Waterloo tech sector is doing quite well. We've got a number of companies with over 100 million in annual revenues US. Like there's about 10 of them. So it's weathered the storm, the Waterloo tech sector, but smaller companies and with a lower profile. Like I used to compare it to, and I didn't come up with this quote, but somebody else said Waterloo getting BlackBerry was like Liverpool getting the Beatles. Like it was, we were really lucky to have them. But now what we've got is the companies we got are like Jerry and the Pacemakers. If you know your music history, they were from Liverpool, but a lesser known band, Jerry and the Pacemakers. So now we have,
basically they have gone to the background of it. BlackBerry, you would say, yeah.
yeah. So BlackBerry's one of a number of local companies. They're in the top. They're over 100 mil. They're one of the bigger local tech companies, but they're not a business to consumer company anymore. They're not on the cover of Fortune magazine. No, they're much lower profile company, but still active.
So, yeah. So, do you think BlackBerry's legacy is like underappreciated by today's generation? Like once it was a symbol of status. Every CEO and politician, every high-power people used to carry a BlackBerry for food.
Sorry, the BlackBerry phone. I didn't quite hear that. Could you repeat it?
Yeah. Do you think today BlackBerry's legacy is underappreciated by today's generation?
I would say so. I think by the American media, I mean, you still see BlackBerry mentioned here and there, but very isolated. I don't think they get the credit they deserve for creating the smartphone industry. BlackBerry basically was the first smartphone. They didn't call them smartphones then. I forget what they called them. So they were the first basically basic smartphone. And then the iPhone came along, and the iPhone tends to get most of the credit now. But so I think they could get more credit than they do. But I think people who know the industry know what BlackBerry accomplished, and we're certainly glad that it was started here in Waterloo, and we're very fortunate. I think they accomplished a lot, and it was tough to see them go down, but in the long run, it was a good thing what they did, and they deserve a lot of credit for what they accomplished.
Right. So just to ask you a last question, I guess we're running out of time here as well. Just to ask you that if BlackBerry had a second chance, what do you think that they will do absolutely differently so that they ensure their chance of survival or maybe even scoring it in the long run? What do you think they will do differently if they have a second chance, like today, according to today's statistics and today's?
I would say they should have anticipated more the problems with their old operating system around 2004 and started to develop a better operating system. And then as far as the touch screen goes, I don't know that anybody foresaw that sort of coming. But once the iPhone came out, they needed to jump in there more quickly with a matching device that was just as good. So they kind of got flat-footed. They weren't ready. It was their complacency. So being less complacent and trying to anticipate where the market was going, the touchscreen market. I'd say those two things. Being more having more vision of maybe where the market could potentially go.
So I would like to ask, like, right now, as you can see, iPhones. Every new iPhone that comes out is basically similar to the previous versions. Like, would you say that Apple itself is reaching to that point at BlackBerry reached during its downfall? Like, will it begin at the same point for iPhone also?
Yes, I would agree with you. A lot of my question is, what else can you put on these things? They've already got a lot of everything that you would need. I mean, every once in
That
a
is
while, a company comes out with an app that's really popular, but there's we've almost reached the limit of what you can do with the phones. I mean, they're useful and handy, and everybody likes to have one, but it's not. It's become a kind of static industry now. It's saturated. The market's kind of saturated. A mature industry, I think they call it. It's kind of like, what else can you put in a car? Like, well, you can go to the electric car, but or a driverless car. Good luck with that. But so, what else can you put in these things? And like, I look at the smartphone market share now, and Samsung and Apple basically have 18% each, and then the Chinese companies have are the next three, and then yeah, how many more can you keep selling it? It's a mature market, so I don't know where it's going to go, but I can't see a big leap forward at this point. I don't really see it unless AI comes out with something really exceptional. But so I think it's a mature market.
It's, yeah, maybe like something, some another company, new company will come up as iPhone did during BlackBerry's time and de-base all of iPhone. So yeah.
Yes, it could be a 3D device. Who knows? Jumps right out of your screen.
or something maybe biologically genetic. You might just put it, inject it in yourself, and you can
Yeah,
view everything using with come up in your spectacles if you want. You'll just
yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
prompts from here and there in your specs. That is one thing
Well,
which might happen. It's already been tried in science fiction. So I
well,
guess
what
that
kind
will
of
come up
phones do
in
you
few.
guys use? Like, what are you all using?
So I'll just show you my phone. It's a Samsung M35. It's a very
Okay,
basic phone. It just works. Samsung is
Samsung.
predominant here in India. Yeah,
Okay,
Samsung is they've understood the market. I must say they've understood the market completely. In India, it's all about price and how would I say this? But more for less.
right.
The ideology which comes here is that you need you need the maximum amount of features and then least amount of money possible. So that is what Samsung is cracked over. Everybody
Sure.
uses a Samsung. All five of us, I guess, three of us have Samsung. That
Okay,
is one thing.
right.
iPhones are
Yeah.
something of a novelty here. If you see
Mm-hmm.
somebody using an iPhone, it's like a status symbol sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mostly and tier one cities have iPhone users. Tier two and tier three cities hardly have anybody using iPhone these days.
Mm-hmm.
But we have
Wow.
we have that is one of these the key factors which you just asked, right? Uh, that's one thing.
Okay. Wow.
So I guess we need to wrap up for this time. If you have anything else to say to us, maybe some advice for our listeners, or maybe you want to say in general for us as an advice students, we are also graduate students. We haven't undergraduate. Help us out something for us. It will be helpful.
Oh, advice as a student? You're all hoping to be entrepreneurs in the tech field, or
Some other time,
yeah.
maybe an entrepreneur, maybe even to work in work as a professional sometime. If you want to advise for us.
I would say there's many paths you can take, either with a larger tech firm in your area, or even if a big thing here used to be, I don't know whether it still is, but the University of Waterloo grads would always want to go to Silicon Valley and spend a couple of years there and then come back. So like serve an apprenticeship in, Silicon Valley, which is the biggest, it's like a mecca for tech. So be open to something like that. Be willing to travel, I guess. Or if you have an idea for a startup, and it's different and is needed in the market, you can go that way, go small, or there's so many ways you can. Like I did some research on this other guy named Terry Matthews. He's from Ottawa. I was working on part of a book on him, and he used to always say, look at a big company and see where the gaps are and see how you can fill that gap with something to allow them to do their stuff better, and then find a way in that way. So study a big company, find out where they're not doing very well, and try to find a way to improve what they're doing, or find a gap So that's if you went into a bigger established company or market. Look for gaps in the industry that aren't being done well. Like that would be my advice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to
Appreciate it.
right? Just let you know. It was awesome to have you here with us. Thank you for your stories and your time. You brought us some new
Okay.
perspectives, you got some wonderful advice, and so thank you for helping us out. Understanding these things. You gave us some key insights which we did not see in the movie. You read your book. That was lovely, and
Okay.
I completely enjoyed. So that's
Thank
one thing.
you.
Please stay with us.
Thank you.
Just a second. I'll just we can just end the recording over here. Thanks.
And it is really cute, like with those all around, and it looks out into woods.